The outbreak of the French Revolution. We can understand the outbreak of the French Revolution under the following subheadings. 1. Limited rights of the king. In the old regime of France, the monarch could not impose taxes on his own will. For this purpose, he was obliged to take approval of the Estates General, that is, the representative assembly, for which he would summon a meeting of this body of the representatives. However, it was the privilege of the king to decide when to call the meeting of the Estates General. The last meeting of this body was summoned in 1614. 2. The meeting for approval of proposals for new taxes. The French monarch Louis XVI called a meeting of the Estates General on 5 May 1789 for approval of proposals for new taxes. The meeting was hosted in a resplendent grand mansion of Versailles. To this meeting, the first and the second estates sent their 300 representatives each. They were seated in 2 rows facing each other. 600 representatives of the third estate were made to stand behind the members of the first 2 estates. The third estate was represented by the more prosperous and educated members. Peasants, women, and artisans were not allowed entry to the meeting. However, their demands and grievances were expressed in about 40,000 letters which their representatives brought with them. 3. Rules for the Estates General. According to the rules for the Estates General of the Representative Assembly, each estate had 1 vote. Louis was going to follow this very rule, but this time the representatives of the third estate demanded voting by the Assembly as a whole, where every member would have a right to 1 vote. It was a new demand, which the monarch rejected this demand. Aggrieved at this, the representatives of the third estate walked out in protest. 4. The opinion of the third estate about themselves. The demand of the members of the third estate was prompted by the democratic principle, the right of each member to 1 vote, which was put forward by Rousseau in his book The Social Contract. In fact, the representatives of the third estate regarded themselves as representatives of the whole French nation. These representatives of the third estate assembled in the hall of the Indoor Tennis Court of Versailles on 20 June 1789 and declared themselves as the National Assembly. They pledged that the Assembly would not disperse till a constitution was prepared that would curtail the powers of the king. 5. The contribution of Mirabeau and Abbé Sieyès. This time the third estate was led by Mirabeau and Abbé Sieyès. Though Mirabeau was born in a family of nobles, he was not in favor of a social system of feudal privileges. For this purpose, he also brought out a journal and also delivered an inspiring speech before a crowd assembled in Versailles. Abbé Sieyès was basically a priest. He prepared an influential and effective pamphlet titled, "What is the Third Estate?" 6. The National Assembly and France. When the National Assembly was drafting the constitution, the whole of France was agitated. The production of crops had declined due to extreme cold conditions, as a result of which the prices of the bread had risen considerably. Exploiting the situation, the bakers indulged in hoarding. After waiting for long at bakery shops, the agitated women stormed into the shops. The king ordered the army to move into Paris in order to control the situation, but the crowd, having the upper hand, stormed the fort of Bastille and demolished it. 7. Conditions in the French countryside. A rumor spread in the countryside of France that the lords of the manor had called gangs of ruffians and bandits, and the goons had set out to destroy crops. The frightened peasants devastated a number of chateaux, the country castles in many districts, with hoes and pitchforks. They looted grain godowns and burned down records of manorial dues. Under these circumstances, the nobles at large numbers fled from their homes, leaving estates. Many of them took refuge in the neighboring countries. 8. The recognition of the National Assembly. By now, Emperor Louis XVI had realized the strength of the rebellious people. He came forward and accorded recognition to the National Assembly. He had to concede that now his powers would be governed by the Constitution. On the night of 4th August 1789, the National Assembly resolved to abolish the feudal system of obligations and taxes. The clergy were forced to give up their privileges. The lands belonging to the church were seized and acquired by the state. Assets worth above 2 billion livres were appropriated to the government treasury. At that time, the Bailey would not have stood with his back to the elected representatives. Behind depicting Bailey in this way, the intention of David should have been to show that the constitution framed in 1791, after the revolution of 1789, did not fulfill the aspirations of the common man, and the people had turned their back on it. Peasants, workers, and women were disappointed with the constitution. In spite of the Declaration of Rights of Men and Citizens, the right to vote was still limited to the rich and the prosperous people. Otherwise, the participation of all the other people was nil. 2.1. France becomes a constitutional monarchy. The following situations and circumstances were significant for making France a constitutional monarchy. 1. Curtailing the powers of the monarch. The National Assembly had drafted the Constitution in 1791. The main object of the Constitution was to curb the powers of the monarch. Now the powers of the state were not concentrated in the hands of one person, the monarch. Now these powers were distributed and transferred among the different institutions, example the legislature, the executive, the judiciary. Thus this event had laid the foundation of the constitutional monarchy in France. 2. The power to make laws was assigned to the National Assembly. The Constitution of 1791 assigned the power to make laws to the National Assembly. The election to the National Assembly was made indirect. First of all, the citizens would constitute a body of electors, that is, an electorate, which would elect the members of the National Assembly. All the citizens did not have the right to vote. Only men above 25 years of age who paid taxes equal to wages of a laborer for at least 3 days earned the status of the active citizens. All the other men and women were given status of the passive citizens. It was mandatory for the citizens to belong to the highest class of the taxpayers for attaining eligibility of a voter or that of a member of the assembly. 3. The duty of the state to safeguard citizens' natural rights. The French Constitution of 1791 began with the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. The right to live, the right to freedom of expression, the right to equality before law were considered the birthrights of every person. It was assumed that the state would safeguard these rights of every citizen. 4. The Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. The French Constitution of 1791 began with the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. Following were the important facts of this declaration. 1. Men are born and remain free and equal in rights. The aim of every political association is the preservation of the natural and inalienable rights of man. These are liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. 3. The source of all sovereignty resides in the nation. No group or individual may exercise authority that does not come from the people. 4. Liberty consists in the power to do whatever is not injurious to others. 5. The law has the right to forbid only actions that are injurious to society. 6. Law is the expression of the general will. All citizens have the right to participate in its formation personally or through their representatives. All citizens are equal before it. 7. No man may be accused, arrested, or detained except in cases determined by the law. 11. Every citizen may speak, write, and print freely. He must take responsibility for the abuse of such liberty in cases determined by the law. 12. For the maintenance of the public force and for the expenses of administration, a common tax is indispensable. It must be assessed equally on all citizens in proportion to their means. 17. Since property is a sacred and inviolable right, no one may be deprived of it unless a legally established public necessity requires it. In that case, a just compensation must be given in advance. The above painting explains the right to life, the right to freedom of expression, right to equality before law. The figure on the right represents France and on the left symbolizes the law. The law figure shows that everybody is equal before law and all are equal in the eyes of law. The Constitution of 1791 did not give right to vote to all the citizens, so the rights given by this Constitution and the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen had no affinity. According to the Declaration of Rights, all human beings are equal by birth and have equal rights. All are equal in the eyes of law.
But the constitution formulated in 1791 did not approve these ideas. During that period, people did not have similar rights. The French Revolution must have caused a grave fear in the hearts of the kings, the nobles, and the clergy of the despotic countries like Prussia, Austria, Hungary, or Spain, etc. They must have started fearing what happened to the monarch, the nobles, or the clergy in France could happen in their own country also. At the same time, the farmers of the countries must have welcomed this revolution. They must have hoped that they could also achieve freedom from the tyranny of the ruling class as the farmers of France had done.
Please like and subscribe in this my channel.